and welcome to the second ever episode of the DevOps Directive Office Hours. I'm Sid, and on this show, we basically bring on guests, and I work with them on some project of their choosing, and we explore and try to figure out some DevOps or cloud infrastructure challenge that they're currently working on. And so today, I'm super excited to have Donny Roufs. So I'll bring him on. Here we go. Donnie, welcome.
Hey, you actually pronounced my last name right. That's surprising.
Oh, awesome. We didn't even speak about it ahead of time. So what luck.
Yeah, indeed.
Cool. So would you like to give a brief introduction of yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Donny. I've been a developer for almost 2.5 years, but I've been really lucky because I've had a good friend of mine mentoring me, which resulted in 8 to 12 hours of day programming. And after after like 2 years, I started working on an application called LeakDex as a joke. And eventually it started to get attention. So that's kind of where I'm going to. What else about me? I'm into music. I play guitar myself. I'm really focused towards writing proper code, even though if you start looking at LeakDex code base, you'll probably laugh. Besides that, there's not much else to add.
Awesome. And it looks like you've got some fans in the chat. We've got everyone spamming with Donnie. Donnie.
I did some good promotion, I guess.
Nice. Awesome. Well, welcome everybody. If you want to put where you're from in the chat, it's super cool to see where folks are tuning in from around the world. But yeah, so Donnie connected with me through my YouTube channel and joined the Discord server, and we got to chatting about what a collaboration might look like. Donnie, why don't you give a quick plug for your YouTube channel? I know it's new and only has a couple videos, but I'll put a link in the chat here so that people can go find it.
Yeah, so I recently started with YouTube, which will be on youtube.com/Donny Roufs. The main content is going to be teaching people certain concepts instead of code-alongs, and I'm hoping to teach others some cool concepts that I'm aware of. And while I'm at it, I'm also hoping to learn from others. Besides that, it's just yet another YouTube channel to watch if you're bored.
Awesome. Yeah, and focused on TypeScript and some other technologies. What's the focus there?
Yeah, it would be mainly everything would be written in TypeScript.
Okay.
But it's also front end. It's completely full stack pretty much. But I'm starting off at backend because I'm really focused on backend this year. So I'm always trying to teach the stuff that's really fresh in my head, because otherwise I will definitely be like talking nonsense.
That's a good way to go. It looks like we've got Sam here from South Africa. Welcome. We've got Sohail from Montreal, Canada. Nakul from India. Shaikh from India. Miki from Poland. Hopefully I'm doing okay on the names. It's funny, StreamYard turns any emoji into its text format. So Shaikh, send us some good vibes. Awesome. Cool. Why don't we go ahead and talk a little bit about what LeakDex is and what it does. I'll pull it up on the screen, and maybe you can talk through the story of what it is, why you started it, and how it currently is set up.
Yeah, so LeakDex, like I just said, started off as a joke because like I'm really okay, let's start differently. LeakDex is built for the game League of Legends. So if you're not familiar with League of Legends is a MOBA game where you play mostly 5 versus 5. And there's this concept of playing against different characters. So the thing that I hated in League of Legends was trying to remember how to play against a given character. So
because each matchup there's different strengths and weaknesses, right?
Yeah, so you had character A and character B, so that would be a matchup. So it's like, okay, why not make some kind of tool to write down personalized notes for a matchup instead of having to go to Notepad or some Markdown editor and putting it in there every time. So I started off doing that, and some friends of mine started using it too. But at that time, it was really crappy, like really, really crappy. So I started improving it, and it kept getting better. and then I promoted it on Reddit just because of the sakes of it. I was like, you know what, why not put it on League of Legends Reddit and we'll see from there. And like within the first 2 hours, I got like 800 new users. And from there on, I started developing League of Legends with a serious, what is it called? Like a serious motive, maybe?
Yeah.
But anyway, so that's how it kind of went. And so the only thing it really does is it tracks your played matchups automatically. So if you go back to the concept of League of Legends, and you would join a game, LeagueDex would detect that you are in a game, and it would show you the current champions that you're playing against.
Does it connect to your League of Legends account?
Kinda, yeah. So
okay.
Yeah, so if we go to, can you go to staging.leaguedex.com?
Sure. Leaguedex.com.
If it works. Right, so if we log in there with the test credentials.
All right.
I mean, it's not going to work completely, of course.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so you're a new user and you...
Change your password.
and you create an account. So now if you click on the hamburger menu on the top left.
Yep.
Go to settings. And we scroll down a little. Then in here we can see summoner account. So in League of Legends, you have your own account. That's called a summoner account. So in LeagueDex, I'm asking you to add your account here. But that doesn't mean that you need to log in to Riot. You just need to give me your name and that's it. And that's all I need to talk to the external API of Riot. And from there on, I just get all the data I need.
Got it. So you're pinging a public API to track whatever accounts they have listed here.
It's public, but it's protected with a...
Yeah.
You need a key, which was actually really surprising because you can get a development key, which you can only use privately. But to get an actual key for production, you need to make a submission. And for me, it took like 3 months to get one. So
oh wow, like
so if you ever want to,
and then they were reviewing for a long time.
Yeah, so if you ever want to do something League of Legends related, make sure you do a submission like pretty early on because it's gonna take a while.
Good to know. Good to know. And so what does the technology stack of LeagueDex look like in terms of what are you using for the database? What are you using for a backend API server? And then I'm assuming TypeScript on the front end, but feel free to correct me.
Almost. Okay, so when I started with LeagueDex was my first serious full stack application. I had done a few applications beforehand, but I never published it. But back then I wasn't really familiar with TypeScript, so I just went the straight JavaScript way. But this stack would be so plain as JavaScript, both on the front and back end. But the front end would use React. React is not using any fancy state management tools. It's literally context, which needs to be refactored really later on. So if you go to hooks, you can see it through Nightmare. So all of this is using, well, most of it is using context for state management, which I don't know if you're familiar with React that much, but it gets like really painful.
Yeah, and you're not using anything like Redux as a global state. Yeah.
No, because like it started off as a joke, so I wanted to quickly create everything, and Redux is just a lot of boilerplate. I know how to use it, but I just wasn't a big fan. So I was like, you know what? Let's plug in context, and when it works, we can refactor it. But I'm still like in the state of, I still need to refactor this.
Yeah, I mean,
but it works.
You said it's been working for quite some time. You hadn't even logged into your VPS in a while. Why don't you tell everyone about that?
Yeah, so the DevOps side of things?
Yeah. So we talked about the front end. What do you have a database on the back end? What are you using there?
Yeah, so the back end is also just plain as JavaScript. If you go to source, well, actually, let's go to bootstrap.sh first. So if you go one directory back.
And you're not using Express or anything like that?
I am.
You are. Okay.
So before we even get there, so I created this like like this to me is already magic. But I created this to quickly bootstrap my development environment. So if you look at this, you can see I'm using some kind of Docker, which is starting up Postgres for me and Adminer, because I'm a fan of using some kind of interface on the development side of things, just to make sure everything is going well. I'm using Prisma as an ORM, which allows me to do migrations, seeds, all that good stuff. It's a pretty old Prisma version though. I tried to update it to the newer versions, but then I had some conflicts with the current migrations. So I was like, you know what, it works, whatever. Let's stay at this version. And yeah, besides that, there's not much else to look at in this file at least. But if you go back to source, and then application.js. So this is kind of the bootstrap file where we can see all the stuff that's running on the backend.
Got it.
So it's using Express under the hood. Like I said, also plain old JavaScript, not even using import export syntax, which I really hate at the moment. If we scroll a little bit down, you can see that besides Express, we are not really using anything else to run the server. I have a few cron jobs set up to clear, to sync data from the right API, check for passwords and everything. And there's also on line 101 a to do for me, because I had issues with SendGrid, where it wouldn't use my domain. So some people couldn't create a new account. So I was like, okay, you know what? Let's leave it out for now. We'll fix that later. Yeah. So the backend is just using Express, Postgres with Prisma as an ORM. Everything else is custom minus some CSRF stuff. And authentication is all written from scratch too. So that's pretty much good stuff.
Yeah. So you're taking in their password and hashing it and storing that hash off in your
and for the authentication flow, I'm just using OAuth2. You get your refresh token, your access token. I'm storing that on the server, so I have my own sessions, all that stuff, and it works, so that's good. And for the hosting environment, I am using droplets on DigitalOcean. So for people that don't know, a droplet is pretty much a VPS. And right now, I've installed Postgres, Nginx, and a node environment, like plainly on my VPS.
So did you just start from one of the base Linux distributions and build from there? Yeah, versus one of their sort of pre-configured, they have like a Docker one or other ones.
Yeah, I went completely from scratch, just Linux, and I added everything. I'm using PM2 to run all my applications. And as you could see, I have leakdex.com and staging.leakdex.com. So that pretty much means that on the backend or on the DevOps side of things, I'm actually running 2 servers, 2 instances of databases. And next to that, I'm also running my front end. So everything is running on one VPS.
These are all on one droplet, or?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I've realized that this is a real pain, because it also gets really costly, because the moment I want to build something, it's going to complain about memory usage because there's so much stuff running on the droplet.
So a couple of questions, like how many active users would you say that LeakDex has? And then if you can share what size droplet, like what the stats are on the machine that you're using.
Yeah, so out of the top of my head, I checked. So I'm using Cloudflare with LeakDex, mainly for protection, actually. I had like 4 DDoS attempts in the last few months.
Oh, wow.
But I looked at the stats this morning, and the past 24 hours, I had 80 unique visitors.
Okay.
And for the past week, I had about 400. And for the past month, I was close to 1.5K. So it's quite active. People are generating some really cool data, which is fun to see. And for the VPS, I'm actually not sure what kind of specs I have, so I need to look it up quickly. I had to upgrade it.
No worries. I know they start at like $5 a month for a shared vCPU, where I think you get one vCPU and maybe 1 gigabyte of memory, but then they go all the way up to hundreds of dollars per month once you get to the big machines.
Yeah, it's not that expensive. If I remember correctly, I went up to the $20 a month. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Cool.
That's the one. So for specs wise, I have like 4 gigabytes of RAM, 2 CPUs, 80 gigabytes of SSD storage, and 4 terabytes transfer, which seems to do, which seems enough for now.
Yeah. Cool. Would love to hear about sort of what the process looks like for if you make a code change and then you want to roll that out to staging and then production. Could you walk me through the current process of what you would have to do, whether there's any automation set up, which steps you would do manually, and that sort of thing?
Mm-hmm.
In the meantime, we've got a couple more comments here. I see Geert from Belgium, welcome, and Mohammed says hello. So cool.
Okay, so if we go to .github workflows, let's look at staging first. So let's say I am using GitHub Actions with self-runners,
okay,
which allows me to just push to a branch and then automate it on my VPS.
So right now, self-runner is on that same droplet.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Cool.
So right now, if I want to change something to staging.leakdex, then I can push whatever to the branch development, and then it will build it for me, and it will handle everything. So I have nothing else to do, actually. It's just pushing to that branch and it does it for me. And same thing for the master branch. So development is for staging, master branch is for production.
And so because it's self-hosted, we're actually checking out the code onto the machine, building it in place, and then do we need to move it? Like, I haven't really used the self-runners on GitHub Actions. Is it inside of a container or anything, or is it on that system and you can just use it directly?
Yeah, it's on that system. You can just use it.
Okay. So
but
yeah,
my
we're
server,
just moving it. Yeah.
Yeah. Let me see. Yeah, so the client, I'm moving the client, but the server stays in the same place where it just gets uploaded to.
Yeah,
but
the
also something that
is going into. Are you using?
I'm using Nginx.
Nginx. Okay, yeah. That looked familiar.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if I needed Nginx at the beginning, but I'm also doing some reverse proxy. So I was like, okay, let's just add Nginx and not use Express to serve my front end.
Yeah, and if setting up like HTTPS and stuff is a little more straightforward, I think, on something like Nginx.
Yeah, it was pretty easy to do. It actually took me a while, but then I figured it out and I was like, okay, this is easy. And then a friend of mine told me about Cloudflare, and I was like, okay, let's add Cloudflare, and that also does it for you. So I was like, okay, from now on, I'm just gonna go to Cloudflare.
Yeah, are you using like the flexible SSL setting, or which? Because I think there's a couple levels on Cloudflare. You can say no secure, like just HTTP. You can have it encrypted traffic to Cloudflare, and then it sends it unencrypted to your server. And so that if you do that method, you don't even need to have certs on your server, but there is a slight vulnerability if someone was able to get in the middle between Cloudflare and your server. And then there's a third level, which is like you have a certificate on your server, but it doesn't have to be self-signed, I think. Like it can be a generic one. And then the fourth level, you have to have like a special certificate that matches your the certificate on Cloudflare.
Yeah. I'm not 100% sure, but I believe I went for the third level. Yeah, it's been a while since I set it up. Something that I also just realized. So for the server side of things, I'm not building anything. So the development code is going to be run by PM2, which is a true nightmare because if I want to migrate to TypeScript, then there's no build step. So that would be actually something for a wish list.
Oh, I
the
see.
stuff
I
that
see. It's because there's no build step. You're just copying directly in,
yeah.
and running against it.
Yeah, from this part, I was confused because it wouldn't stay in the working directory for me. So something that I always used to do is, with coding in general, if you don't know how to do something or you're just implementing something, duplicate it, make sure it works, then refactor it. But as you can see, I made it work, but I didn't refactor it because I was going to move this to a own shell script on the server and then just run it from the action.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Right. Yeah. I mean,
you can
usually
see my struggles.
You would see one line here that says something like run setup.sh or
Yeah.
whatever. Okay. Cool. So this is for staging, and then there's something similar for production. Probably
Yeah.
about the
Pretty
same,
much the same
except
thing.
when you push to master branch.
Yeah, and it moves to a different directory for the
end.
client.
Yeah. And then just there's some environment variable that is telling the front end which of the two instances to call out to.
On the VPS, I got 2 different environment variables, which they will use for their own database and all that stuff.
Got it. And those, are you storing those as secrets in GitHub, or are those just stored?
No, they're stored directly on the VPS.
On the VPS.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. So that all makes a lot of sense. It sounds like we had a few items there that we can add to the wish list. We'll try to loop back to those. What about on the infrastructure setup side? Did you do everything through the DigitalOcean GUI to like set up the VPS and stuff, or did you use any sort of tooling there? Or they have a command line too, I guess.
Yeah. So at the very beginning, I used the console. I hate it. Like, I hate it so much because even in the console, I was like sometimes you need to copy paste stuff, but that doesn't work in there. So it really frustrated me. So that was my first introduction into using SSH keys. So I had to set that up, and then from there on, I just did everything through SSH. I didn't touch anything that they provide. That's all I actually did.
Got it. And so you were manually SSH'd into this VPS and ran some set of custom commands to install Node, install PM2, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so I just installed everything.
And is that documented anywhere? Like if let's say DigitalOcean, all of a sudden your VPS exploded and they're like, all right, we got to get a new instance of LeagueDex set up. How much of that would it be you creating a new one and trying to think back to what all needs to be installed, or what would
that would be
like?
it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
I was like, I've been trying to get into Docker more and like just setting up a proper Docker environment so I could just move it to my VPS instead. But I believe there's even a pull request in there where someone did this really boilerplate Docker stuff. If you scroll all the way down, build Docker, I think.
Dependabot.
Yeah, it hates me. But yeah, I was still planning to work on this, but I never did.
Cool. Okay. Awesome. So I think that gives us a pretty good sort of overview of the project, the current state of things. I was thinking I would just pull up a GitHub issue on this repo and we could talk through that wish list of sort of improvements, what places are current pain points, where we could add some more DevOps practices to make your life as a maintainer of this project easier, or maybe protect against some of those potential scenarios where the VPS goes down or what have you. So if anyone in the chat wants to add any questions or comments around the project and the DevOps for the project, would be happy to take those as well. But yeah,
that part actually scares me. If something happens with LeagueDex right now, then I'm really screwed, like completely screwed.
Is it generating income for you, or is it currently?
No, it's just I don't care about money at all. So I just make everything open source that I do, and if people want to donate something, feel free to. But I don't care. I just do this because I like it. So that's all I need, to be honest.
Awesome.
Yeah, and all those issues in there are just created by me. I'm trying to always create issues when I got a public repository so people can see what I'm doing. If they want to help out, then they can help out.
Yeah, it's interesting working sort of in public on an open source project. Sometimes I feel like I need to behave or like use the same level of professionalism that I would on a corporate client project because everyone
Mhm.
can see it, right? If I'm doing something on my own, maybe it's messy, but like working on development branches and actually creating pull requests for things, even if I'm the only one working on it,
Mhm.
it just makes it much easier for someone else who comes into the project to see what's going on and actually be able to follow and potentially contribute.
Yeah, indeed. Right now, like there are no templates or anything to make your own pull request. But my goal was to refactor the backend properly to
Mm,
TypeScript, and from there on, also make sure that all my templates are set so that people can actually contribute really easy. Because right now the code base is so, like, I would call it spaghetti code, so it's really hard for people to add something to it.
got it. Yeah. And what is this licensed under? I don't see a license here. Um, that would also be
I didn't bother.
okay. Yeah. I mean, if
It's
you
something I
do,
should.
yeah, if you want additional contributors, having it be clear actually helps because I think otherwise it defaults to the GitHub. There's some default license
Hmm.
that they have, and
Yeah.
it's actually more restrictive than some of the other ones. So, yeah,
Yeah, it's
potentially
actually
adding,
interesting
yeah.
because I've been reading about licenses actually yesterday because I'm doing another open source project,
Hmm.
and there's so much stuff, and they all explain the same thing, so it's really confusing. So I guess I will just stick with MIT for now.
Yeah, I mean,
Which,
there's translating from like the easy conceptual, like I want it to be open source and anyone to be able to use it, into the legal jargon,
hmm.
and sort of all the nuances of MIT versus a GPL, or what are even the main ones, Apache,
Hmm.
etc. Like
Yeah, I've seen this right.
they all have very slightly different meanings, and so yeah, it's tough to even know which one to use.
Yeah, and to be fair, as a developer, I hate reading because I read a lot of docs already. So the moment I see all that stuff, I'm like, you know what? Whatever. Let it slide for now.
Yeah, yeah. We've got a question from Sam. He wants to know if you will add potato.png to League decks.
No. He
The
has been
answer
asking this
is
for a while
no.
now.
What does that even mean? I feel like there's a secret code there.
No, he just likes potatoes. He just, even in my other open source project, he wanted me to add it.
A potato Easter egg.
Yeah. Would actually be funny though.
Cool. So I'm going to pull up an issue here, and then we
Mhm.
can just chat through. We're going to call it the DevOps wish list. Yeah, so as we talked through that, a couple of things stood out to me. You mentioned, if we start sort of at the infrastructure provisioning step, automating the setup of the VPS itself and adding all of the necessary dependencies would be
Mhm.
one place that it's a pretty low likelihood event that sort of your droplet explodes. And I don't think I asked you, but do you have backups for the droplet turned on? Because that could also protect
Yeah.
against that, I
Mhm.
guess.
Yeah, but it's
Um,
like weekly, I believe.
okay.
So if something happens, and then people will lose at least 1 week of data because the database is also, all the data of the database is on the VPS.
Oh, right. Um, we had, and so that could look like a few different things. Um, it could be something like Terraform for infrastructure as code. That might be
Mhm.
a little aggressive for this sort of one man, one VPS kind of project. Um, Maybe just a simple shell script that we can initialize the VPS from the GUI or from the command line and then run one setup script to install everything. So this could be Terraform or IAC tool. It could also just be simple bash script to.
So what does IAC tool stand for?
Sorry, infrastructure as code.
Right. Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah, so something like Terraform, something like CloudFormation if you're on AWS, or Pulumi is another one that I feel like is gaining a little bit of traction that allows you. Terraform has its own like configuration language that HashiCorp has defined, the company that is behind Terraform. Pulumi allows you to use Python or TypeScript or Go, a few different languages. So it's kind of an interesting concept where you have the full expressivity of the languages that you're used to, but also can map those onto these infrastructure resources. But right now, it seems like Terraform is kind of the de facto standard in terms of these infrastructure as code tools.
Right. I remember reading some articles about Terraform where people hated it in the beginning because like it has this different syntax, but eventually they just started loving it, which was an interesting read.
I really like it. I use it both for personal stuff and for client work. I'm actually working on sort of a long form, some content around starting from scratch with Terraform and progressing to at least like an intermediate level. So I made a bunch of slides and example code, but I haven't gotten around to filming that yet. So hopefully in the next few weeks or month, I'll get back to that project. We'll see.
That always happens.
Yeah, exactly. So I guess I'm actually gonna split that previous line into two. We could talk about provisioning the VPS, and then we can talk about configuring VPS, right, with all the dependencies.
Yeah.
And so for something like this, there's a number of options. I think probably the way to go for something of this scale is just to have a script, like a setup.sh script that you can run, just so we have at least documentation within the code base of what all was installed, how to do that, etc. In a bigger project, you might use some configuration management tooling to do that. Something like Ansible, or there's a bunch of tools out there. Puppet, etc. But yeah, I think for something like this, just a simple script would probably be sufficient. You mentioned the weekly backup, so if we did have an issue, that would leave us a delta there.
Yeah, some people mentioned it's daily by default, so now I'm not 100% sure. So it could be daily, but it's still people will still lose data. So
yeah, that's good to know. Cool. And then right now we are currently hosted on a single VPS.
Yeah.
It would be interesting to look at sort of the stats on that VPS in terms of memory usage. You mentioned adding additional processes. You're worried about hitting up against the available memory.
Yeah, so when people use it, there's not much to worry about. But the moment I start building, then it becomes an issue. That's why I also had to upgrade, because it's just building so much stuff. It just takes all the memory.
Like when you actually
so the moment I push
new code. Yeah.
But I guess that's because it's like when I'm pushing, it's still running all these cells through PM2, and it's also building new stuff. So I guess it's just taking up so much memory that it just doesn't know what to do.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. You don't necessarily need to build it on the self-hosted runners. Like you could offload the building workload onto GitHub Actions, run it within their free tier. You'd probably be fine, and then copy those dependencies over the network. If you wanted, so you could move the building workloads off of the off of the VPS would be one option there.
Wow, that would have saved me some money.
Yeah, I mean, they've got the free tier there. I actually generally use their hosted runners, unless I have a good reason to not. The other thing is that you mentioned that running everything directly with PM2 has become a bit of a hassle. We could, if we wanted to, Dockerize the front end and the back end.
Yeah, that would actually be cool.
Yeah, so then you could build those Docker images on GitHub Actions within their hosted runners, push to the DigitalOcean registry, and then spawn your container. Yeah, exactly. And that sort of provides a nice clean break, and alleviates any concerns about discrepancies between whatever host operating system and configuration you have in the GitHub Action environment compared to whatever environment you have on the VPS itself.
That would also get rid of the first step though then, right? Or the second one, like installing all the dependencies for your VPS.
Yeah, exactly. So in that case, I would go with DigitalOcean provides like a...
Yeah, a template for Docker, right? Or Doku even, I think.
Yeah, exactly. I forget. I don't have my account up, but yeah, they basically, when you go to create a new droplet, you can select Ubuntu, Debian, or you can go to their marketplace, and they've got stuff like pre-configured Docker, etc.
Yeah.
So that could be a good way to go. Yeah, whether or not you would want to run your Postgres instance inside of a container is debatable. Some people are of the mindset that you shouldn't. Other people think it's okay as long as you configure things correctly. I wonder how much DigitalOcean's like hosted Postgres option costs these days. It might be relatively expensive. So. Yeah, I mean, moving to a hosted database option definitely takes the burden of dealing with things like backups and stuff off of your plate, but usually it does cost a bit of a premium. Yeah, so just their minimum instance starts at $15 a month.
Right.
Yeah, so if the project starts to scale and the database becomes an issue, then moving it off of your VPS so that it can sort of scale independently could be one way to go, but probably not necessary at this time.
That's a good option though. Yeah, and there's also right now with the database, there's no way for me to look into the data without going into the VPS itself. So I've never been sure if it's actually a good idea to like expose something like adminer or pgadmin to the outside world. Because I remember once at a school project where we had what was it called again? PHP my admin exposed to the outer world, and then we spent like 2 weeks working on an application, and then we had to deliver it. And then exactly like 10 minutes before we had to deliver it, it got hacked and all the data was lost. So I'm never sure if you should ever expose that.
Yeah, I mean, the more things you have exposed to the outside world, the more potential attack vectors there are. And so if there were some vulnerability in pgadmin or whatever the administration tool is that didn't affect the core database engine, then that would just be one more way to attack. What you could do is have it running but not expose it, and then set up like an SSH tunnel from your local system to the VPS, and then be able to use it from there. Would probably be what I would suggest there. Cool. We also don't have any sort of test suite, do we? I don't think.
No, tests are coming though.
Tests are coming in process.
Yeah, so the moment I start refactoring, I will write tests before I refactor. So that's when tests will be added. But it will mainly be on the back end, not on the front end. You're cutting out for me, I think.
Can you hear me okay now?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Let me make sure my last live stream, my wired Ethernet was not working properly, but now it appears
that happens.
Yeah, I'm getting 90 megabits down and up, so I should be okay. Cool. Let's jump back to the comments and see what other people are saying. Is there any of my videos where I walk through transition from development to production, automate deployments? Yeah, so what I would suggest, I did a collaboration on the Traversy Media channel, where I did sort of a DevOps crash course where I used Terraform and Docker and deployed onto a VM in Google Cloud. So Pushkar, I would check that one out. It's kind of a hyperspeed tour of DevOps, so it's a little tough to follow because I really blazed through it in 1 hour, but maybe check that one out for that. Just a Dev came to a similar conclusion that we did of like maybe move the build process onto a separate server or potentially just use the GitHub Actions runners to handle that. White Fang, hello. We saw him in the last live stream, so I'm glad you were able to join again. Good to have you here. Do you have a swap file is a question for you.
No.
No swap file. Cool. Presumably that would be for helping with the memory issue is probably why they brought that up. Saeed says that Nix is amazing for building the dependencies and creating reproducible environments. I haven't really used Nix that much.
First time I've heard of it.
Yeah, let me... Oh, not next. Oh, NEX. There we go. Yeah, maybe that's something to look into. My go-to option for coming up with a standardized environment that I can deploy consistently is to use Docker and containers. It's just what I'm more familiar with. Hans says, "Good job, son." I don't know if that's actually your father.
Yeah, that's actually my dad. So that's
awesome.
Great that he's here.
Yeah, glad to have him. Just a Dev. Tests are coming. I think that's everybody's mantra. Tests are on the way.
Yeah. I mean, I like writing tests, but sometimes it's just a pain to set it up properly. So then you just start writing code and then you have like 2,000 lines of code and you're like, okay, now I'm not going to add tests anymore. Whatever.
Yeah, I mean, some people are very strict about test-driven development and coming up with the test first and then writing a test that fails, writing the code to make it pass, improving the test to match the use case. I have a hard time doing that. Like you, I think I want to jump in and get things working. And so it feels like a burden up front, but in the end, having a good test suite is hugely helpful in terms of trusting an update that you're not going to break anything.
Yeah, that's also the main reason why I'm scared of adding new features to LeakDex. Because my code is already like really tightly coupled and there's no test. So when I push a new feature, I push it to my staging branch or environment. And then I need to manually check like every single user flow to make sure that I didn't break anything before I actually push it to production. So that's one of the reasons why I'm like postponing adding new features, because I'm still planning to refactor everything and add some tests to just make sure that that doesn't happen that often. I mean, it will still happen, of course, because no one can write perfect tests. But actually, talking about TDD, I've been reading Test-Driven Development by Kent Beck, which is a really great book. And I've also been applying it more to my newer projects. But yeah, sometimes you just want to get it to work. Like, it's good to write tests, but I think it's okay to just ignore it for a while. Till you get something to work, and then you can look back at writing tests.
Yeah. I mean, I think it depends too on sort of the scale and scope of the project.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, this was going to be sort of a fun one-off project, and then it grew, and so you decided to mature it a bit. And so, depending how you're thinking about a project from the start, you might approach tests a little differently.
Yeah, definitely. Like for myself, I'm trying to develop more like feature-wise. So creating one feature to me right now would mean making sure it's tested, making sure it works, making sure it's documented, all that stuff. So that's something that I'm trying to follow, finish a feature, do all those steps, and then next feature. But it's still tough though.
Yeah. Have you ever run into situations here, because they're all running on one VPS, of you pushing an update to staging that maybe has an infinite loop and starts to consume massive resources and just causes everything to sort of shut down? Like, have you had interference between the environments because one process is grabbing all the resources available to it?
I did in the beginning when I had like the 600 users that randomly joined. And when I tried to push something to my staging environment, my production environment would break. But because I upgraded my VPS, it hasn't happened anymore. But I would assume that when I start hitting like more users, it would happen again.
Yeah, and so there's a couple of ways you could try to start to isolate that and protect against those scenarios. One of which would be to use, if you're using Docker, then you can specify the resources that are available to any given container, which are using C groups under the hood, the Linux feature C groups. If you are not using Docker, you could use C groups natively, but the tooling there is, I don't know if PM2 has anything like that where you can specify a resource limit or anything, but
I'm not sure.
Yeah, so you could either try to isolate things within the one VPS with something like C groups within containers, or you could move to separate VPSs. And then once you get to the multiple VPS world, now you start to think about, do I want to maintain multiple droplets, or am I at the point where I would rather just move to something like Kubernetes? But that adds a whole nother level of complexity. I really like Kubernetes and I'm familiar with it, but sort of jumping in for a small project like this without experience is probably overkill.
Yeah, I remember my first application that was full stack that I tried to host on a droplet. I got stuck for like 4 days, and then I asked someone else to help me because I was so lost. And then we still like spent an entire day because we couldn't figure out how to stop Docker from not caching the node modules. So every time when we had to run a build, it would just do it completely from scratch again. That was so painful.
So thinking about the ordering of your steps in a Docker file is really key. And so whenever you're building a node application, almost always you'll see start from node, copy in package.json and package lock, install the modules, then copy in the rest of your source code. Is sort of the pattern that you'll see over and over. Because otherwise, if you copy in all your source code initially, then literally every change will bust the cache.
Yeah.
But it sounds like you found that after a few days.
Yeah, I've learned that the hard way. It's fun though. Like if I don't have anything if I don't have anything to do with a given time pressure, then I like doing trial and error with this kind of stuff. But my life is getting busier, like really busy. And right now I'm just like, okay, if it works, it works. And if it doesn't work, then whatever. I will find a way.
Yeah. Cool. So this seems like a pretty good list. I don't know, should we go through and maybe pick a couple that seem like the highest value add? And then we could set up offline. I can work on it. We can work on it a little bit together, and then potentially come back on for another live stream to actually implement a few of these. With that.
I was also, would you also want to split the front end from the VPS?
Yeah.
Because I've seen people host the front end on, for example, something like Netlify instead.
Yeah, so because it's a set of static assets, you could put it into something like Netlify or GitHub Pages or a Google Cloud bucket. So that could be one way to sort of pull out or prevent the front end from taking up resources when there's a lot of free, very stable options for hosting a static front end like that. So that's a good one. And with PM2, are you running multiple instances of your backend, like of production and staging, or a single instance?
Multiple.
Multiple, and then letting it load balance across them?
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, that's a good idea, and that allows us to free up additional resources for the backend.
And then there's one more thing missing, and that's adding a build step for the server. But I guess because I will be moving to TypeScript, so I will definitely have to build it.
And then I noticed you had some Docker Compose stuff. I'm going to submit this one, and then we can come back to it and edit some more. But you're not currently using Docker, right?
No, it's only for my development environment.
Okay, so you have a Docker build, but it's only for setting up the Postgres. Yeah.
So I never install databases or anything on my PC. For that stuff, I just use Docker.
It always surprised me how hard it is to natively install a database and get everything configured right versus just the Docker.
Yeah, exactly. Just have your Docker file or your Docker Compose ready and just use it for any project. That's how I've been doing it.
Yeah. Cool. Joshua asks, does using Docker slow the application down compared to not using a container? Not too much, because really Docker is just providing a nice interface for some of the native Linux kernel functionality in terms of C groups and namespaces. It doesn't add hardly any overhead to the application, so it should be good. And Oliver mentioned that my audio was a little quiet. I turned up my mic a touch, so hopefully it's okay now. And hello to Madhan. Cool. Yeah, this is a pretty good set of things. Like I said, let's try to think about what would be the highest impact value add for you as the primary developer and maintainer on this project. What I was thinking initially is sort of moving the build off of these machines, since that seems to be a bottleneck and a potential issue. So moving the build step to GitHub Actions and containerizing the application would sort of, those two things together would help address a lot of the challenges that we brought up in terms of it simplifies this configuration step quite a bit. We can just use like the Docker based VPS. The one open question there for me still is sort of what to do about the database itself and whether we want that to still be installed directly on the machine or whether we want to put that in a container as well. So that would be sort of an open question that we would want to explore.
Yeah, I will definitely do some research myself just to see what kind of opinions there are about Dockerizing your database. But as far as I'm aware, I think it's fine to just Dockerize it. But like, I don't know any facts, so I can't really argue about that right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think as long as you are careful about how you configure things, such that you make sure to have the data stored in a volume on the host system, it's probably fine. So yeah, I think sort of doing those two things of Dockerizing it and adding the Docker build, push, and deploy steps into a GitHub action running on the GitHub hosted runners seems like a pretty high value add to me. Are there any here that jump out to you in terms of what you think would make the most sense to focus on?
Actually, the two you picked out were the ones that I was going to say also.
Okay.
And then there's also this database stuff, but that's something to worry about later. But besides that, like adding an extra build step for the server, that's also like, as far as I'm aware, that's pretty much already done the moment you start Dockerizing anyway. At least as far as I'm aware.
You mean this configuration stuff?
No, so the last bullet point, so adding the build step for server.
Oh yeah, exactly. So because we are bundling up the application, that would just be one more step in the Docker file.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But besides that, I think yeah, maybe isolating staging production, but
I mean,
not sure if
putting
that's necessary.
by putting it into a container, we could then specify the resource allocation for those containers when we spawn
Yeah,
them.
indeed.
And so that helps to isolate. I guess the one thing that we will lose a little bit of when we move from PM2 to the containers is that PM2 has that nice load balancing out of the box. And so we would need to come up with some solution to allow us to have multiple instances and load balance across them. That's very easy to do in the Kubernetes world, but I'll do some research as well offline in terms of what the best solution there is going to be.
I was going to say it's always easy if you know how it's done, right?
Exactly.
It's actually funny because for the past year, I've been mentoring people, and every time someone asks me like this really generic question, how easy is this to do? And then I'm like, well, if you know how to do it, then it's easy. It just reminded me of that. It's kind of funny.
Yeah. Cool. So yeah, I think those as sort of the primary focus for the next stream in terms of Dockerizing and migrating the build onto GitHub Actions make a lot of sense. And we can chat offline about when we want to do that, whether next week makes sense or a couple weeks from now. But that should be fun.
Yeah, definitely. I will also be doing some self-study, just so I don't feel like a complete noob when we're doing this. But yeah, it's definitely going to be fun.
Cool. And Pushkar says, would be great if we could implement on the live stream. Yeah, that's the plan. We'll probably do a little bit of research ahead of time just to make sure we're not coming in completely blind and sort of know what the approach and strategy will be. But ideally, we will walk through the process of actually building out some of this stuff live. And that's the goal with this whole series, is to show the actual steps of building and improving these types of projects. So great suggestion from Pushkar, and is exactly aligned with what we're trying to do. All right. We are right at the 1 hour mark. So I think that is kind of a good place to call it for today, but really enjoyed getting to learn more about the LeagueDex project. And thanks for walking me through the current setup. And I think we came up with a good wish list here.
Yeah, definitely. I'm also glad that you're helping me with this stuff, because like for most of the stuff I've been doing, I've done self-study besides the little bit of mentoring of a good friend of mine. So it's really great to have someone with more knowledge on a given concept to actually do it. So that's really great.
Yeah, happy to help. And I think you are much more advanced than I am on the front end and with the TypeScript piece. So I think we will complement each other's skill sets well, and learn some things along the way. So
definitely.
Cool. Well, I'm gonna wrap it up here. Do we have any final comments from the crowd? Sun says hello world, hello back to you, and Just a Dev has now subscribed. Not sure if it's to my channel or yours. Hopefully both. Don't forget to smash that like button, right?
It's actually funny because Dev is the friend of mine who mentored me, and we are still really close. So he most likely stopped on you.
Awesome. Cool. Great content. Thank you, Pushkar. Glad to have everyone here on the Global DevOps Directive team. All right, everyone, have a good Friday. Have a good weekend. Take care. See you next time.